Allow me to give you just a little bit of introduction, Lindsay. I want everybody to know, one second, still pulling myself together after that. Powerful story. I want everyone to know that Lindsay is an award-winning journalist, writer, producer, and podcast host whose work has been featured in the New York Times, CBS, NPR, ESPN, and many more. After being diagnosed with ADHD in 2021, an experience she calls the best thing to ever happen to her, actually, she spent 2 years learning how to navigate life with a neurodivergent brain. Then in 2023, her world shifted again with a diagnosis of dermatomyositis associated with antisynthetase syndrome. Leaning into advocacy and storytelling has been essential in Lindsay's journey of learning to live with chronic illness and dynamic physical disabilities. She is passionate about raising awareness and building community for others facing similar challenges. Lindsay is proud to partner with us, and we are proud to partner with her. And I mean, by we, TMA, No Rare, the Infusion Access Foundation, and Nori's Fight, all of whom proudly partner with Lindsay to amplify patient voices, improve access to care, and drive the science forward. I spent this week with Lindsay here in Washington, D.C., and many other rare advocates as we visited legislative offices together. In every meeting, we asked for steady and robust leadership, strong federal biomedical research funding, and support for our public health agencies. These are non-negotiables. Federal agencies are essential partners to supporting timely diagnosis, conducting research, enabling therapy development, facilitating insurance coverage, and implementing public health programs. The myositis agenda led by TMA calls for supporting their efforts, especially those of the committed scientists, clinicians, and teams at NIH's NIEHS, NIAMS, and NCATS. We stand for science now more than ever. And again, we are so glad that you are all here today because rare diseases need more research, not less. And to further illustrate why that is so important, I very happily and again very proudly pass the microphone to our keynote speaker, Lindsay Guentzel.
Thank you so much, Paula. Back in November, I was invited by the FDA and the NIH to speak at Rare Disease Day. And honestly, it was the glimmer of hope that I needed. It gave me something to look forward to, something to work towards. But a few weeks ago, like so many of you probably did as well, I started to see the writing on the wall. And when it wasn't canceled, I was honestly surprised. Of course, you all know last Friday we were notified that the 2-day event had been postponed. So this is a modification of the speech that I would have given today in Bethesda. And I just want to start off by saying that I am so grateful to all of you for joining us here today. I'll be honest, over the last few weeks, I had been struggling with what I was going to say on stage. When I was first invited, I knew exactly why I was going. But somewhere along the way, that why started to shift. And it felt more like I was not just there to share my story, but to prove something. To prove that I'm worthy of care, of a future, that my health matters. Not to any of you. You already get it. You are here because you care. But outside of rooms like this, many of us feel that same creeping fear, that our lives, our worth, are up for debate. And how could we not when the very institutions that hold our hope, like the NIH, are caught in uncertainty? Funding freezes, delayed research, clinical trials on hold. For those of us living with rare diseases, those delays aren't just numbers on a budget, they're years stolen from our lives. Again, I know that I'm not speaking to any of you. You all understand what's at stake. But beyond this room, so many don't. Not until they have to. Not until it's their life that is upended. So let my rare disease story be a reminder for them. Rare can happen to anyone at any time, even to you. I joke that I always wanted to be special, that I love being the center of attention, but that all of this is a little much. And here's the thing, I really did want to be special. I know we're not supposed to admit that, especially as women. We aren't supposed to own the fact that we set high expectations for ourselves. But I wanted to be special. And I had been working really hard to get there, wherever that may be. And then all of a sudden, all of that was gone, and I was special for something that I had absolutely no control over. Something I hadn't worked for, something I didn't want. Most people don't dream of becoming a medical mystery, of becoming both the patient and the puzzle. Now, remember, I want it to be special, just not in a we have no idea what's wrong with you kind of way. But that's become my reality. For the past 2 years, I have been learning what it means to live with dermatomyositis associated with antisynthetase syndrome. It's a mouthful, I know, because it's actually two rare diseases for the price of one. Because who doesn't love a bargain? Nope, nope. Okay. Antisynthetase syndrome is an umbrella diagnosis, a complex syndrome made up of a constellation of conditions that often occur together. Think of it like a hand. Antisynthetase syndrome is the palm, and each finger represents a different symptom, like myositis, interstitial lung disease, Raynaud's phenomenon, arthritis, fever, or mechanic's hands. Some people experience more muscle issues like dermatomyositis or polymyositis, while others struggle with more lung complications. And even people with the same antibody can have different symptoms or different levels of severity. For me, my hand is filled with dermatomyositis, interstitial lung disease, mechanic's hands, Raynaud's phenomenon, and arthritis. Before I got sick, I felt like everything in my life was finally falling into place, personally, but even more so professionally. That everything I had wanted, that I had worked for, felt like it was finally within reach. And a huge part of that is because of in January of 2021, just 2 months shy of my 35th birthday, I was diagnosed with ADHD. It was like receiving answers to a question I didn't even know I was supposed to be asking. So much started to make sense. And it would be impossible for me to share my rare disease story without sharing my ADHD diagnosis story as well. Because I know without a doubt, I would not have survived these last 2 years without that diagnosis, without those answers. My rare disease story has a before and an after. One day I was healthy, or at least I thought I was healthy, and then the next day I wasn't. In January of 2023, my partner John and I were in Sedona, and I had tasked him with picking out a hike for us. A hard one, he remembers me telling him. And at some point during our 5-hour hike up and down Bear Mountain, which is the first or second hardest hike in Sedona, depending on which website you look at, I got some cactus spines in the back of my thigh. And I remember getting to the car and pulling them out and honestly not really thinking any more about it until the next day, because the next day I woke up looking like this. A trip to the emergency room sent me home with a big bottle of antibiotics and a cellulitis diagnosis. I flew back to Minnesota without a second thought, fully expecting it to clear up in a week or so. Except it didn't clear up. In fact, it just continued to get worse. And after weeks and weeks of appointments and extensive testing, I received my formal diagnosis on March 7th, 2023. According to the National Organization for Rare Disorders, most people with a rare disease wait an average of 5 to 7 years before receiving an accurate diagnosis. I received mine in just 2 months. Looking back through my medical records, it's clear there were so many people at Hennepin Healthcare in Minneapolis going to bat for me behind the scenes. I have to thank Dr. Buchler, the dermatology resident who I saw for my very first appointment, who saw the rashes and the roughness on my fingers and knew there was something much bigger going on. He looped in gastroenterology, who brought in rheumatology, and they were able to put the pieces together. But receiving a diagnosis quickly doesn't mean your journey will be easy. Once you have a rare disease diagnosis, your life becomes a full-time job that you didn't apply for. Although, if we're being honest, the full-time job actually starts the minute the search for a diagnosis begins. Leading up to receiving my diagnosis, while my medical team worked their expertise, I worked mine. I landed my first paid journalism gig when I was 21 in college, writing for my university's daily newspaper, and I've worked as a multimedia journalist ever since. I've always been inquisitive, that undiagnosed ADHD shining through, and I used the skills that I had built over the last 15 years to dive into all of the other possibilities. As the list of potential diagnoses got shorter and shorter and worse, I clung to the possibility that there was a completely understandable explanation for what was happening to me. The new skincare line I was using, the fake nails I had just put on, the THC gummies I had been using for sleep. I even reached out to cactus researchers because how could it not be the cactus? Much to the dismay of everyone in my life who loves a good story, it wasn't the cactus. What I know now is that infection, that run in with the cactus, it was just gasoline poured onto an already burning fire inside of me. That I had been sick for a while, and the signs were finally apparent enough for me to see. You're probably wondering, how could I not notice? When I got sick, I was in the best shape of my life. John and I were working out 4 to 5 times a week, and I was strong, like really strong. So the muscle inflammation, one so commonly associated with myositis, for me, it felt exactly the same as the aches and pains I experienced after a really intense leg day, that after workout soreness. Had the Great Cactus incident of 2023 not happened, I worry how long my disease would have stayed under the radar. Over the last 2 years, I've had more than 350 medical appointments. That's 3 appointments on a week on average. And that doesn't count the 24 days I spent in the hospital or the more than 10 emergency room visits I've had since we went on that hike. I've been poked and prodded more times than I could ever count, and I truly learned what it means to live blood draw to blood draw, as it became the only way to know how my body was responding to treatment. I've spent nearly 250 hours in infusion chairs, undergoing Rituxan, IVIG, and cyclophosphamide, a form of chemo, dealing with reactions like aseptic meningitis and allergic reactions, like the one I dealt with in September of last year that left me sick for 3.5 weeks after the infusions were over. I've traveled to donate my plasma for drug research, allowed every resident and fellow to sit in on my appointments, and have mastered the balancing act of being my own case manager, researcher, and advocate. Managing the weight loss, managing the weight gain, the hair loss from both the disease itself and the chemotherapy, dealing with the sleepless nights from the high-dose prednisone, dealing with the sleepless nights because my hands and arms would fall asleep anytime I tried to lay down. I'm not just being cute when I say my health has become my full-time job. Those rooms also became my office. Taking Zoom calls while the infusion nurse worked around me, figuring out how to finagle a recording studio out of a hospital bed, lots of pillows, and a bed sheet. It is possible. Learning how to edit out the obnoxious beeping from the IV machines from podcast episodes. Because while I had to make my health my priority, I also had a job I not only needed to do, I had a job I wanted to do, one that I absolutely loved. I've been incredibly lucky to have so many people show up for me over the last 2 years, but the unfortunate reality is, at the end of the day, all of it, all of the things I carry as a person with a rare incurable disease, it all still comes down to me. Managing my appointments, feeling the need to take the earliest available appointment, even if it completely screws up my schedule because everything feels urgent, because most of the time it is. Dealing with the insurance battles, staying up to date on which medications I need refilled and at which time, sorting out so many pharmacy errors, finding a clinical trial and finally getting in touch with the right people at the clinical trial, dealing with delay after delay. Well, finding a perfect balance of staying hopeful, but not too hopeful. Hopeful that I'll be selected, and then hopeful that it'll work. But worrying all along that you're putting all of your eggs into one basket, which, yeah, you are. You have a rare disease. You only have so many baskets. All of that has fallen to me, and it's a lot, and it can be very exhausting. Every medication I take is a gamble, not because I want it to be, but because I don't have the luxury of waiting for better options, or even the time to sit with the weight of that decision. There's no pause, no space to carefully weigh the risks, because the reality of my disease doesn't wait. I swallow pills and I sit through infusions, knowing full well that the side effects could be brutal, that the long-term risks are unknown, that almost all of these treatments weren't even designed for my disease in the first place. But when your reality is shaped by pain, fatigue, and a body that refuses to cooperate, the question isn't, what will this do to me in 10 years? It's, will this help me function today? Because I don't get the privilege of hesitation. I need to live now. I want to live now. My life, despite all of this, is pretty amazing. And the unfortunate reality is it isn't waiting for me. The future's a problem for another day if I can just get through this one. The only other person who has been affected as much as me is my partner, John. John and I have been together for 10 years, and in addition to my ADHD diagnosis, I know I wouldn't have survived these last 2 years without him. Well, I may have survived, but it would not have been pretty. Well, I've been forced to turn my entire focus to keeping myself alive. John has taken on the share of responsibilities I can no longer handle. At one point in time, he had to leave his job to stay home with me because I couldn't be left home alone. And then he formed his own business that gave him the flexibility he needed to be able to take care of me just in case the flare comes back, because we all know it's going to come back. You know, my life has been completely upended, but so has his. In a different way, sure, but we're comparing apples to oranges. I joke that I was a lot to handle and then I got sick. But the thing is, it's kind of the truth. I am a lot with my disease, without my disease. And I'm just so grateful that I get to do this journey, the good, the bad, and the ugly with him. He's never once made me feel like a burden, and that's truly the most beautiful gift he could ever give me. See, the thing is, there was no manual handed to us when I was first diagnosed, no guidebook or path to follow. We've just been doing the best we can with what we have at any given time. And somehow we've managed to laugh more in the last few years than the eight before that. There's this other part to living with a rare disease that I wasn't expecting. I wasn't expecting to have to work so hard to get people to believe me, to have to fight for accessibility and accommodations. See, when you have a disease that even some medical professionals have never heard of, it adds a layer of self-advocacy that some days just takes the wind out of your sails. Because when people look at me, especially right now, they don't see someone who's sick. The number of times I've been told, but you look great. And yes, that's from medical professionals too. One of them even considered an expert on my illness. That's the thing about invisible illnesses. You're constantly performing for those around you. You choose your words carefully and you become an expert at describing things with an intense amount of detail because you have to. You find yourself explaining why you need your cane, why you're using your scooter one day and walking the next. You're watching people do the mental math, trying to decide if they believe you. It's important to remember that people love a good recovery story. They love the idea that you fight and you win and then you get better. But what happens when getting better isn't an option? What happens when the best case scenario isn't remission, but simply management? I live in that gray area. I have an incurable disease that can flare up at any time. Over the past 2 years, I've rebuilt some of the 25 pounds of muscle I've lost, only to lose it and rebuild it again, and again, and again. And that's going to continue to happen. I spent last summer relearning how to sit up on my own, not a normal activity for a 38-year-old woman. And here's the truth I do have to face. I will never be the person I was before I got sick. But I'm still here, and every single day I fight to be seen, to be heard, to make sure the people who come after me don't have to fight this hard. We need funding for research. We need doctors trained to recognize rare diseases. We need healthcare systems that work for patients, not against them. Because the simple fact is, rare disease is not rare. I think it needs a marketing overhaul, if I'm being honest, because that word rare just throws people off. There are 300 million of us worldwide. That's nearly the entire population of the United States. See, getting diagnosed with ADHD gave me this roadmap for understanding myself. But getting diagnosed with a rare disease truly taught me how to survive. And through it all, I've learned that resilience isn't just about pushing through, it's about knowing when to ask for help. Now, in my original speech, I had planned to share a lot about the relationship that I've built with Julia Nickerson over the last few months. But Julia, in this impromptu day that we have thrown together, got to share her story here, and I'm so proud of her. But one of the things that I wanted to share is I joke that every single person that I've met on this journey is somebody that I would spend time with in real life, even if I wasn't sick. And that's the truth, because it is such a special community. And whether you are here as a patient, as a caregiver, as a family member, as a friend, I know I have a lot of people in the audience right now. And my goodness, does that just mean the world to me? Because I wouldn't have made it through these last 2 years without all of you. And I love the people that I've been able to introduce into my life because of this. And I'm not one of those everything happens for a reason kind of people, but despite everything, I'm really enjoying where I'm at in life right now. And I hope you all feel a little more seen after that. I hope all of your struggles feel a little more held up by the rest of us. We have to be a community because the days are so hard that if we don't, it's just going to be impossible. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for being here, for being so supportive these last few weeks. It has been a whirlwind, but I got to tell you, on Friday after we got the news, that was 11 a.m. This event was planned by 5 p.m. So I will say something. Do not light a fire under a group of people that you do not want to make change, because it will happen. So thank you guys so much.
Wow, thank you, Lindsay. Big round of applause. So much love coming your way in the chat. I definitely want to say today, Lindsay, you are seen, you are heard. All of you are seen and all of you are heard. And we will continue to walk this walk with you.